Welcome to Book Nibbles. Big ideas, small bites. Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad Poor Dad is less a conventional finance manual and more a personal narrative wrapped around financial lessons that challenge the way most people are taught to think about money, work, and security. At its heart, the book is a contrast between two father figures in Robert's life. One was his biological father, a well-educated man with a steady government job, who he calls his poor dad. The other was his best friend's father, a businessman and investor with little formal schooling but an intuitive grasp of how money works, who he calls his rich dad. From these two men, Robert absorbed entirely different philosophies, and the clash between their approaches became the central drama of his financial education. Growing up in Hawaii, Robert saw the material difference between his two mentors. Poor Dad, his real father, worked diligently, climbing the ladder of the education system, believing strongly in the power of academic achievement and job stability. He preached to Robert that the surest path to success was to study hard, earn good grades, and land a secure job with benefits. To him, the government and big corporations were safe havens that protected workers who demonstrated loyalty and competence. He lived by the traditional script: work hard, earn more, save diligently, avoid risk, and trust that retirement and pensions would provide for the later years. But despite his impressive resume, advanced degrees, and respected career, poor Dad struggled financially all his life. His paycheck was reliable, yet money always seemed tight and financial worries were constant. Rich Dad, in stark contrast, barely finished 8th grade but had an entirely different perspective. He believed that working for money was a trap that kept most people dependent and anxious. Instead, he argued that money should work for you. He emphasized financial literacy, investing, and entrepreneurship over job security. While Poor Dad urged Robert to avoid risk and value stability, Rich Dad pushed him to take calculated risks, to be creative, and to understand money at a deeper level than just earning and spending it. Rich Dad believed the key to wealth lay in understanding the difference between assets and liabilities, in controlling cash flow, and in cultivating the mindset of an investor rather than a worker. Robert recalls that he and his friend Mike wanted to be rich and began asking questions about how wealth was built. When they first asked Poor Dad, he laughed and told them to study hard and get good jobs. Unsatisfied, they turned to Mike's father. Rich Dad smiled at their curiosity and offered to teach them, but not in the traditional way. His first lessons were deliberately frustrating. He made them work at one of his convenience stores for free, then for very low pay, just to see how they would react. Robert grew angry, feeling cheated, and wanted to quit. That was exactly the point. Rich Dad explained that most people get stuck in the rat race because they work for money without questioning the system. They fear not having enough, so they work harder, and when they earn more, they increase their spending, which traps them further. His lesson was that you don't become rich by working for money, you become rich by learning how money itself works. That distinction between working for money and having money work for you is the foundation of the book. Rich Dad stressed that financial education is more important than job titles or degrees. He warned Robert that schools teach people how to be employees, not how to be financially independent. While Poor Dad valued credentials, Rich Dad valued financial intelligence. The ability to read numbers, to see patterns in markets, to understand risks, and to identify opportunities. He argued that people who lack financial literacy, no matter how much they earn, will always be poor, because money will slip through their fingers as fast as it comes in. One of the most memorable and practical lessons Rich Dad taught was the difference between assets and liabilities. He defined assets as things that put money in your pocket, while liabilities are things that take money out. Most people, he explained, confuse the two. For instance, they consider their house to be their greatest asset, but in reality, a house often drains money through mortgage payments, property taxes, maintenance, and insurance. A true asset might be a rental property that generates steady income, or stocks that pay dividends, or a business that runs without your daily labor. To become wealthy, you must accumulate assets and minimize liabilities, but the average person does the opposite. They buy bigger houses, nicer cars, and more gadgets, thinking these purchases are signs of wealth, when in fact they are obligations that drain cash flow. This idea of cash flow is central. Rich Dad taught Robert to picture money moving in and out like water through pipes. The poor and middle class tend to have money flowing in from wages and immediately flowing out through expenses and debt. The rich, on the other hand, build asset columns that bring in money whether they work or not. Once your assets generate enough income to cover your expenses, you are financially free because you no longer depend on a paycheck. This mindset, focusing on assets instead of wages, became a cornerstone of Robert's life. Robert highlights how deeply ingrained the paycheck mentality is. Poor Dad, despite his education, was emotionally attached to his salary and pension. Losing his job or benefits was his greatest fear. Rich Dad said this dependency was exactly what corporations and governments wanted, because it kept workers loyal and manageable. He insisted that freedom comes from not needing a paycheck, from having money generated by your assets, not your labor. That's why he encouraged Robert to think about building businesses, investing in real estate and studying markets, not just excelling at a profession. Taxes were another subject that revealed the difference in their perspectives. Poor Dad saw taxes as a civic duty, a necessary part of contributing to society. Rich Dad didn't encourage cheating but emphasized that the tax system rewards the financially educated. He explained that corporations are legal entities that provide tax advantages. Employees earn money, pay taxes first, and spend what's left. Corporations, however, earn money, spend on expenses, and pay taxes only on what remains. By understanding this structure, the rich legally protect and grow their money, while the poor and middle class often shoulder the heaviest tax burden. For Robert, this was an eye-opening realization that wealth is not only about how much you earn but how you structure your earnings and expenses. Another striking theme in the book is fear and desire, the emotional forces that control financial behavior. Rich Dad pointed out that people's fear of not having money drives them into jobs they dislike, and their desire for luxury makes them spend recklessly once they have some money. These emotions, fear and greed, keep people on the treadmill. To break free, you must learn to manage your emotions and think rationally about money. This doesn't mean being cold or greedy, it means resisting the impulse to spend for status and overcoming the fear of risk. Robert admits that he struggled with these emotions too, but Rich Dad constantly reminded him that courage and financial education, not comfort, create wealth. Rich Dad also believed that opportunities are everywhere, but most people miss them because they are not looking, or because they are too afraid to act. He would often point to situations others considered problems, such as a downturn in the real estate market, and show how they could be opportunities for those who are prepared. He encouraged Robert to train his mind to see possibilities, to think creatively, and to take action when others hesitated. That entrepreneurial mindset is what separates those who wait for a raise from those who build wealth independently. Over time, Robert came to see how different life paths emerge from these philosophies. Poor Dad worked hard, followed the rules, and hoped for security, yet financial stress plagued him and his dreams were constrained. Rich Dad, who broke rules, took risks, and sometimes stumbled, ended up wealthy, influential, and free to shape his own life. Robert didn't dismiss his poor dad's values. He respected his integrity and work ethic, but he realized that adopting poor dad's mindset would not lead him to financial freedom. Instead, he chose to follow Rich Dad's principles. The book doesn't just tell stories, it slips in practical takeaways. Robert stresses the importance of financial education, learning accounting, investing, market dynamics, and the law. He says you don't have to master them like a professional, but you need enough literacy to make informed decisions. He urges readers to start small, to invest in assets even with modest sums, and to build habits of saving and reinvesting. He discourages blindly working harder for higher paychecks, because that often only increases taxes and spending. Instead, he suggests cultivating skills in sales, marketing, investing, and communication, skills that directly translate into financial opportunities. Robert also highlights how failures and mistakes are essential to success. While Poor Dad avoided mistakes for fear of embarrassment or loss, Rich Dad embraced them as learning opportunities. He would rather Robert make small mistakes early than grow up paralyzed by fear of failure. This perspective deeply influenced Robert's entrepreneurial spirit. It gave him the confidence to start businesses, invest in real estate, and learn from each misstep. He argues that wealth comes not from avoiding failure but from persisting through it, armed with the lessons it teaches. Throughout the book, Kiyosaki underscores that wealth is not about luck, inheritance, or high salaries. It is about mindset, discipline, and education. He criticizes the school system for failing to teach financial literacy, leaving generations of students financially dependent. He advocates for self-education, for reading books on investing, for attending seminars, and for surrounding oneself with mentors who think differently. Robert also makes it clear that building wealth is not about greed or hoarding money, it's about freedom and choice. Financial independence allows people to live life on their terms, to give back generously, and to pursue passions without being enslaved by bills or employers. He himself used his wealth to write, teach, and share these lessons worldwide, hoping others could break free from financial struggle. In the end, Rich Dad Poor Dad is not a detailed how-to manual of investments but a book about shifting your mindset. It invites readers to question long-held beliefs about work, income, and security. It challenges the comforting myths about houses being assets, about education guaranteeing prosperity, and about saving being enough for retirement. Instead, it calls for active financial literacy, asset building, and courage in the face of risk. The book's enduring popularity lies in its simplicity and relatability. Everyone knows a poor dad type, educated, hardworking, but financially constrained. And everyone has at least heard of a rich dad type, unconventional, risk-taking, often criticized but ultimately free. By framing the lessons through these two father figures, Robert makes abstract financial principles vivid and memorable. Readers walk away questioning their own assumptions. Am I working for money or is money working for me? Am I accumulating assets or just liabilities? Am I letting fear and desire control me, or am I thinking like an investor? Robert's conclusion is both sobering and empowering. He insists that anyone can learn what he learned from Rich Dad, but it requires unlearning old habits and being willing to think differently. Financial freedom is available to those who seek it, but only if they embrace responsibility for their own education and choices. Waiting for employers, schools, or governments to take care of you is the path of the poor dad. Taking initiative, seeking knowledge, and building assets is the path of the rich dad. And that is the central truth Kiyosaki drives home again and again. It's not about how much money you make, but how much you keep, how hard it works for you, and how many generations it serves. And that's it. Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad Poor Dad. Thanks for listening to Book Nibbles. If you enjoyed this bite-sized book, don't forget to subscribe for more quick, insightful summaries. See you in the next nibble.